Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Knights of the Last Call. My name is Derek Melinda, welcoming you to a Tuesday night stream. So, hopefully everyone is doing well. I have been struggling a little bit this weekend. Some more effects from my ongoing anxiety panic attack thing. So it's been a week of doctors and tests and scans, trying to figure out if there's anything wrong with me or if I'm just going crazy. But we're here. Mr. Smith said something that was pretty funny. We are scheduling our final Forbidden Land session, and and we were talking about what are we going to do next, and thinking about some of the realities of a situation and play times and trying to schedule everything, and and Smith was of course like, maybe we can actually play some Dungeons and Dragons and play some fun, play a fun game where it was like it wasn't really a game. It turns out it was therapy. And then he put like in italics, it's like the narrator's overvoice, like Morgan Freeman's overvoice. It's like they didn't know at the time, but it turned out that Derek had developed a psychological dependency on RPGs, and in 2024 he did not receive enough. He did not receive enough RPGs to hold off all the mental anguish and pain that he had been building up. So Smith is theorizing that my lack of RPG playing this year has caused me to have medical issues and mental breakdowns. Well, that is the most probable diagnosis I've received yet. Thank you, London. Yeah, it's not been great. It's not been great. But I am finding that hopefully we can find out that there is something wrong with me, so that I don't think it's just anxiety. But I think I might have some sort of digestive issue. Honestly, I think I've kind of correlated enough of the symptoms, so maybe I have some sort of hernia or ulcer or some sort of acid reflux or esophagus issue. I don't know. Remains to be seen. Fun times here at Knights of the Last Call, right? Well, that's because this stream is special. This stream is one of us brought to us by the Knights of the Last Call patrons who voted for this topic. At first, I was like, God, could they have picked a worse topic? But second place was talking about economics and economies of scale, or how to make economics fun and profitable in our tabletop role playing games. So maybe we dodged a bullet. So maybe we're going to talk about Magic. I know I say this a lot, but this stream really may not be that long of one. I don't know that there's a whole lot to really dig into here. A lot of this stuff is stuff I've said before. But there's a couple of interesting topics that we can get into. And if people have comments or questions, please drop them in. No stream goals tonight, just, because we'll keep it going. And if the conversation seems to die, well, then, we'll probably call it a night. So rather than keep it struggle bussing going on. Anyways, and also, my mental state. Ayla says chemical imbalances are also a thing. Yeah, so for the first time in my life, I am on a very small dosage of a mood SSRI. I'm on they put me on Lexapro. I just got on it, so I don't think it's having any real effect yet, but we'll see how it turns out. I'm a little scared, I suppose would be the weird term. Scared is not maybe the right term, but I'm interested to see how this affects my mood and my shifting and my balance. So yeah. So there's a possibility there, and that was assigned by my primary care. So I'm actually going to see a psychiatrist next week. So we'll see what they want to do and how they want to guide and diagnose me and medicate me or whatever. Maybe some therapy too. Who knows? We could do it all. Would Magic be better in D&D if there were no saving throws? Well, Jonathan, my initial reaction is no. It depends on what you mean. We're actually going to get into this, but there's TTRPGs have a problem, and I'm kind of jumping the gun here, but the problem is that it's that last letter. It's a game, and there are a lot of things that are really cool about Magic, and there are a lot of things that make Magic awesome, and there's a lot of things that make Magic special, and there's a lot of things that make Magic powerful. And there's a lot of things that make Magic random and unpredictable and uncontrollable. And all of those things tend to make a really shitty game. So there's this tension. And we'll kind of talk about this and get into this. And I'll share some of the experiences that I've had over the years and recently. And, we can kind of maybe talk about some of the newer systems that I've been exposed to, just this year. Ars Magica, one of them. And, of course, Burning Empires, which the Kickstarter started today. I think I'm going to be backing. Trevor has, he talked a little bit about it at Gen Con, and it was cool. And hearing him talk about the game, it's a whole separate topic of conversation, but he really is just, I'm not saying that he's doing it hopefully in a kludgy way or in like a Frankenstein way, but he is, taking his favorite games and game elements from the last, 20, 30 years and sort of hodgepodging them together into the game that he wants to play. All right, we'll give it a go. Let's see here. So anyways, I want to say hi to everybody here. Hi to Ben, London, Ilya, Dank, Omniscient Toad, Scotty P. Mark is here. Back to the bad thumbnail. One day chance. Mark, maybe one day. What's up, Spider Matt? Good to see you. Sunhawk, what's up? Ken, hello. Sweet D's RPGs. Yes, you showed up on time today. Unfortunately, normal speed is rough. Oh, it's you have the same avatar. That makes it easy. Let's see here. What's up, Pepper? And William, your L5R stream convinced me to try it out. Awesome. Well, I'm excited for you. I think it's a really cool system. I think it does a lot of really interesting things, and it's a lot deeper than you might ever give it credit for. So mind blown saying that it can take a while till you find the right medication. So, all right, well, here's hoping. What's up, Cephalodog? So I'm anxious about my anxiety medication. Yes, I am anxious about my anxiety medication. I am anxious about my panic attack. Actually, I mean, again, we're all over the place here already, but I've been so used to having this kind of heightened level of anxiety that, I was having these chest, I could really feel my heartbeat in my chest. And now I feel like, things are more calm. And so now sometimes I'm like, I can't feel my heart. I'm like, it's supposed to be beating out of my chest, right? Like that became the new normal. It's crazy. I'm spiraling. But yes, in general, I'm anxious about my anxiety medication. Problem, magic destroys the game. That is kind of more or less true. And when we say game, I mean in the terms of a capital G as well. Thank you, Pathfinder. Hello. BE is 100% a fantasy heartbreaker. BE meaning Burning Empires. I think he's discussed this, and I think Trevor has openly admitted, basically being like, I want to tell you that it's not a fantasy heartbreaker, but that's what everybody who makes a fantasy heartbreaker tells you. I think he probably would reluctantly admit it is a fantasy heartbreaker. It very much is. Derek says, curious to see where this goes today because I didn't have much in mind when I pitched it. There you go. That's true, London. At least I had some ideas of where I might take this today. So, all right. So let me start off with sort of a fundamental treatise, or what I think about what does it mean to make magic realistic, and what does it mean to make magic, feel magical? What does it mean to make magic feel like it's part of the game? And these are my personal opinions, but generally speaking, I believe that some of my very favorite fantasy novels and series, first and foremost amongst them, Earthdawn, but also the Legendarium of J.R.R. Tolkien. And, these worlds, and I'll also include even Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire in that as well. In my mind, are some of the most magical feeling and magical fantasy that exists. And the term, which I'm sure all of you know because you're all, unremitting nerds, is a lot of these worlds that I love, that I feel truly capture the spirit of magic, are what we call soft magic systems. And this is contrasted with a hard magic system. And definitions will vary from, place to place, but by and large, the concept of a hard magic system is one in which there are well-established rules, where there's logic, where there's, sort of a procedure. And in that way, magic becomes more like a science. It becomes more like a technology. And I think that a lot of TTRPGs have gone that way. They have made what essentially relates to a hard magic system. D&D, first and foremost amongst them. D&D in some ways is like the hardest magic system. This is what the spell does. It's, it's like running a program. Okay. And then when that program executes, it does the same thing every time. And for the most part, right, this is, probably arguably a good thing because it allows us to play the game and to understand what this spell is going to do. But I think magic is way more interesting when it is very soft. No one can really explain to you how magic works in The Lord of the Rings. Magic, there's things in The Lord of the Rings which are unexplained. Even within the context of The Lord of the Rings, there's things that not everybody knows and how everything works. If we look at Earthdawn, Earthsea, this is also the case. Now, sure, there's this idea of spells and the old tongue and, speaking these things into words, but there's no one-to-one relation. There's no formula that you could do. And a lot of times I like to say that it's more art, right, than science. And I think the inherent property of magic that makes magic magical is that unknown quantity. It's the scale of it, not fully understanding that you can't turn it into a technology. You can't turn it into a, something you can productionize and just, roll out. Now, Wheel of Time, in some ways, I would say is sort of a soft hard, because Wheel of Time clearly has this idea of these weaves and stuff like that. But there's also just a lot of unexplained stuff in the Wheel of Time. And there's a lot of stuff in the magic system itself, which is kind of unexplained. And it's that mystery, it's that unknown factor that I think creates this feeling of magic being magical. Because once you understand something, right, it's no longer magic, like almost by definition, right? Sure, you might be pulling it from the etheric conduit of the astral plane of whatever, but once it's like just a thing that you can do, once your magic spell, I mean, especially if you're playing like a D&D or Pathfinder, once your magic spell is defined by the number of D6s of damage it can do and the 20-foot radius burst that it will always, deliver, it's a lot of, it could be a lot of fun, right? But it loses that sense of magic because it becomes just kind of boring and rote and repetitive and easy. Now, I will sort of side tangent here. There's maybe a couple side tangents here. I don't want to lose my main thread, but you guys can keep me honest. Is some games, and I've been playing one recently, Forbidden Lands, but there's games like Shadow Dark, Forbidden Lands, Dungeon Crawl Classics, a lot of old school games have, I think, maybe, I don't want to say they missed the mark, but for me, there is a fundamental flaw with these games. And that is they, in the effort to make magic mysterious and feel uncontrolled, they decided to make it random and capricious and dangerous. Now, I don't think there's anything wrong per se with dangerous magic or random magic. But I do think that in the context of a TTRPG, it is a little bit problematic. Because when you create a system where you say you want to be a spellcaster because you want to cast spells, but then you create a system that punishes you for trying to cast your spells, it is a very weird game problem. Now, like, it could very much be the case, and it kind of I said we would talk about this. Burning Empires, the new game coming out from Trevor. I always blank on his last name. Trevor Duvall. From Me, Myself, and Die. I watched his thing about magic the other day, and he talked about how he was combining elements from Ars Magica and a couple other systems. And he talked about how, if you create a minor magical effect, it doesn't have that much of a backlash. But if you create a major magical effect, it can start to tear at your pattern of your character because you're sort of meddling too much with the world. Kind of shades of Wheel of Time. And he basically says that once you reach a certain point, mages know that they're, sorry, I said Burning Empires. I meant Broken Empires. Broken Empires. Thank you, Daniel. Broken Empires. Burning Empires was a Luke Crane game. So he says, like, after you cast so many spells, your pattern, you basically poof. And the pattern, the fabric of the reality kicks you out of it, and you're basically gone. You're just dead. That is kind of cool in theory, but I also find it very frustrating again, specifically from a TTRPG perspective. And I have experienced this firsthand these last, however many months playing Forbidden Lands, Because in Forbidden Lands, magic, it works every time you cast it. There's no random roll to see if it works. But every time you cast a spell, there's a good chance that you might have some sort of mishap. And, they could be bad. It could ruin your character. It could even turn your character into a demon, right? There's just like a lot of horrible things that could happen. And I think this is a way of the game saying, magic is very powerful, but you should never use it because it's dangerous, And I think that is not great from a game perspective. That's like saying, hey, fighter, you got this really cool sword, but you can never use it. I think that's problematic from a game perspective. It might be cool from like a fantasy perspective, from like a novelization perspective. But from a game perspective, I think it's very problematic because you chose to make that character because you want to cast spells. That's what makes you stand out. That's what makes you different. That's what makes you unique. And that's not maybe necessarily true in every single game system, of course. But by and large, if you want to be a spellcaster, you want to cast spells. So while it may make sense from a certain point of view that magic is dangerous and deadly, I don't think it's very good from a game perspective. And I will say that soft magic systems can be really, really cool and really, really interesting. And let me hop over to the PDFs. So we looked earlier this year at Ars Magica. And this is where Broken Empires is taking a decent amount of its inspiration, okay? And basically, Ars Magica has this idea of what is kind of called a verb-noun system. In Ars Magica, they're called techniques and forms. And I think there's like 5 or 6 techniques, right? So the first thing is like the verb. So you have creo, which is I create, okay? And you have intellio, I perceive. And you have muto, I transform. And rego, I control. And pardo, I destroy, right? So you have all these different verbs. So you can I control, I transform, I destroy, I create, okay? And then you have the forms. Good night, Ben. And then, so what can you create? What can you perceive? What can you control? Well, you have your forms, which are, animal, arbom, plants, animals, ignem, which is fire, corpus, which is body, auram, which is air, aquam, which is water, imaginum, which is image, mentem, mind, taram, and then weem, which is power, and then taram, earth. So basically, in Ars Magica, we have this very basic structure of, I have, maybe I have I create, I have the creo technique. So what does creo taram, what does create earth mean? What does it do? Well, nothing, everything, right? It could be any spell. And there's a whole system in this game for basically kind of, customizing and, creating spells. And the thing about Ars Magica is these spells are still sort of created. They're still sort of researched. They're still sort of written out. They're still sort of, you establish their range, the duration, the targets, right? And all of this stuff, makes the spell harder or easier to, create and to cast, okay? And so you can just create all these different things and create all these different effects. But let me share with you, this is the Dragonlance 5th Age book, which we played for pretty much most of the late 90s. And sort of a Dragonlance history story. Dragonlance 5th Age was hated by most of the Dragonlance fans, which is fine. But in Dragonlance, you had, it was D&D, right? So you had traditional D&D magic. You had wizards who cast spells, and there were these 3 gods of magic, Solinari, Nuitari, and Solinari, Lunatari, Nuitari. And when in the fifth age, the age of mortals, the gods were banished from the realm, and magic, as we knew it as the spell system, no longer existed. And in its place arose this new form of magic called this old magic that had been around since before the dawn, which was called sorcery or mysticism. And the way that this worked is you had different schools that your character knew. All right, so we'll just take a look at them really quick here. So you had, for example, aeromancy. And obviously this game came out after Ars Magica, so I like to think that they were probably influenced by a much earlier version of Ars Magica. But if your character is a sorcerer and you are skilled in the school of aeromancy, this encompasses the spells of elemental air. It can create anything from a breeze to a gale. Aeromancers might shroud their enemies in a cloud of choking vapor, call up cloaking patches of dense fog, fly above the trees, or encase themselves in a bubble of air to travel underwater. Aeromancy allows a sorcerer to affect the weather, at least to a limited extent. Such dramatic action, however, proves difficult because of its broad scale, and only the most powerful spellcasters can wield most weather magic. So, by having the aeromancy, this is that in the entire game, this is what aeromancy can do. You might say, so what the hell can it do? Exactly. It's very undetermined. It's really up to the player and the GM in the middle of the session. Because unlike Ars Magica, in the Dragonlance game, you didn't have to research your spells ahead of time. You didn't have to go through this process. You literally could create magical effects on the fly. And there was a whole system here. So you can see here, this is an example. You choose the casting time, the invocation time. Okay. So for example, like an hour would have a value of 1, but casting it instantly would have a value of 5. What's the range? So if it's personal, only affecting you, it's only 1. But if it's melee range, it's 2. If it goes out to far range, 5. The area, how many people, how many, what's the area of effect? What's the duration? Instantaneous. And what's the spell effect, which ranges from 1 to 5? In this case, this is a spell doing 5 damage or 6 damage. So you can see that the total difficulty of this spell is 15. And that means essentially in this system, if we wanted to cast this spell, we would need to, number 1, expend 15 spell points. It uses a spell point system. And secondly, you would have to make a DC 15 check. And if you succeeded, then this spell would blast out at melee range in an instant and hit up to 10 people and do 6 points of fire damage to them. Okay? So that's what this spell does. And you basically, you don't pre-program this. You can create these on the fly. Here's another one. This person is creating a crystal bridge to span the chasm. Right? Time is, so Billum is our sorcerer here. Time is of the essence. So Billum can afford to spend only 1 minute casting the spell, imparting a difficulty of 4. He wants to create the bridge right before him, melee range, difficulty of 2, and make it about the size of a large room, difficulty of 3. The bridge effect must last long enough for all the heroes to cross safely, but not so long that the Draconians could use it. Billum calls for a 1 minute duration. 2. Lastly, the narrator, that's the game master, decides that the general spell effect has already been accounted for by the area of the effect. He assigns the category the minimum difficulty of 1. Thus, the total difficulty of this spell is 4 plus 2 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1, 12. And this isn't, the name of some spell. This is just you basically using your magic, because in this case, this character is making some sort of crystal bridge. They clearly have geomancy. They have earth control, right? And in this way, it's a little bit more like, bending. And you create this and you make the effect. And I should also point out that when it comes to things like the difficulty effect, the game has, for example, and by the way, just because we're all looking at this here. So this is our invocation time. So 30 minutes is 1 up to an instant, which is 5. The duration is from instant 1 to an hour, 5. The range is from 1 to 5, from personal range out to artillery range. Area of effect is individual to crowd. And then if it's a more of a spatial area, it's from an individual to a large house. And then when it comes to making numerical adjustments to the game, damage, bonuses, buffs, this is the difficulty as a number. But a lot of times you end up just doing this. Other spell effects. You know, if the spell does not seem to have fall into one of the easy above categories, the narrator assigns it a difficulty rating based on his assessment of the spell's outcome. Most such magics are cast with injurious or otherwise negative purposes. So if it's irritating, troublesome, hindering, impeding, or painful. Obviously, these terms are vague and subject to interpretation. Now, here's the thing. That nowadays in RPGs, that is a death sentence, right? You know, in most modern RPGs, right? Like the trad ones, you know, having terms that are vague and subject to interpretation and requiring narrators to have experience and make judgment calls, right? So, now right. So like we're already sort of in this situation. So what can magic do in Dragonlance? Well, we don't really know. Like we understand that there's some understanding that, you know, a character needs to be skilled in geomancy in order to shape Earth. But what you can do with it and what are the limits of that magic and how creative you could be with that are not limited by anything. It's not really clear how or where this power comes from. It's an ancient magic that the people rediscovered in the absence of the old magic, the sort of Vancian magic, right? In Dragonlance, Vancian magic did exist. It went away, and people had to discover this sort of ancient magic, which was in some ways less predictable, right? Now, I played this with my friends for the better part of several years, this system. And let me tell you something. It was way more magical. Like, spell casting was cool. It involved a lot of creative ideas and a lot of weird, I don't want to say bullshitting, but, you know, it created a lot of really fun magical situations. And quite frankly, it also really stretched and stressed people's creativity, and it asked them to sort of really be, on the spot, right? On the fly. Now, okay, well, as a GM, I felt very comfortable assessing the value of effects. And my players were pretty good about not analysis paralysizing and quickly just coming up with, a spell. So that didn't slow us down. It didn't become clunky. But let me be clear, because again, we played this for a long time. Is this more clunky than casting a fireball? Yes, much more clunky. Because it is, right? It's just, it takes longer, and sometimes people may not agree with an assessment of how something is working and what range things are or whatever. Long story short is that this game was really fun for us, and it was really interesting. Just to drop in a second and says, I hope I spot Earthdawn thread weaving in the VOD. Yeah, we'll talk about Earthdawn. I mean, I kind of actually said Earthdawn accidentally instead of what I was saying earlier, but it requires a lot of GM judgment, and it requires a lot of players to be willing to be, creative and sort of to create stuff. And in the example of Dragonlance, you have aeromancy, cryomancy, which is, cold, divination, electromancy, hydromancy, geomancy, enchantment, electromancy, spectromancy, pyromancy, summoning, and transmutation. And then there was mysticism, which was sort of like, the clerical side of things. You had animism, alteration, channeling, healing, meditation, mentalism, necromancy, sensitivity, and spiritualism. So again, these like 2 or 3 paragraphs, this paragraph right here, basically, it tells you everything that you need to know about this sphere of mysticism called sensitivity. It allows a hero to read the spiritual auras that surround living creatures. Sensitivity can help a mystic gain information about an individual's nature and demeanor, determine whether they are acting under the influence of a spell, and otherwise analyze the nature of a creature. What the hell does that mean? Well, I mean, it kind of means whatever you want it to mean. And that's where, you know, as a game, like we really enjoyed this and it really created this cool experience for us. But as a game, this isn't necessarily the most satisfying thing. You can't really balance this, not in any effective way. And, you know, it leaves a lot of questions about like, well, what could I use sensitivity for? Like, for example, does this say that we can tell if somebody is lying? No, but I would certainly, I mean, I think many people here, I know as a GM, if somebody wanted to create a very subtle sensitivity spell and be able to detect if someone was lying, I would say, absolutely. Of course you can. Right. If, you know, yes, these are called spheres. Sorcery is called schools and mysticism is called spheres. Anyways, point is that this requires a, you know, tremendous amount of GM interpretation. And it requires players who can literally read this one paragraph and then come up with spell ideas and be able to sort of, you know, push the limits a little bit, right? But that's not easy. It's difficult, and it can be awkward, and it can lead to even amongst good players, it can lead to occasional slowdowns and things of that nature. So it has this downside. And I'm sure that Burning Empires and Ars Magica, in their own way, have this same problem. That being said, like, you know, when magic is so like this idea of like, well, how do you make magic realistic? Well, I think it's kind of, you know, counter-purpose to each other, because when you make something magical and fantastical into a sort of routine thing, it doesn't become magical. It becomes more like a technology. And that's how you end up with Eberron, right? Eberron has a very procedural approach to magic. It basically takes the classic D&D experience and sort of productionizes it and modernizes it. And what's interesting too, if you're familiar with the Wheel of Time, then you know that in the Age of Legends, which was the age that preceded the age of the books, you know, when people were, you know, very powerful and capable of casting some of the most powerful magic, it led to a lot of technology, right? It led to an industrial revolution, right? It led to, like, you know, floating anti-grav cars, and it led to just, you know, all sorts of like really crazy technology. Another interesting component is look at Avatar, and look at how in Avatar, The Last Airbender to Legend of Korra, sort of the advent and the increased modernization of bending became, you know, almost part of industrial. I remember there's a great scene where you can see a bunch of like lightning benders, which used to be this rare gift, right? That was only possessed by, like, you know, the people who had studied with the dragons or were from, like, you know, the Fire Nation royalty. And now you've got a bunch of Fire Nation factory workers who are using lightning bending to like charge up big machines to, you know, run a factory. So they've productionized it. They've modernized it. And I know a lot of people who, you know, didn't like Legend of Korra because it made the bending feel less special. It made it feel less mystical. It made it feel less, you know, something exclusive, something rare, something precious. And it kind of made it sort of like, oh, everybody's got bending, you know, and they're using it to, you know, pick apples, and they're using it, you know, on common street cranks, right? The triple threat triads. You know, the pro sports bending, right? Hey, everybody could do these really cool magical powers. Let's make a sport out of it. Chris is here. Hi, just got here. What'd I miss? You know, just me talking about magic. Chris, just talking about everything nonsense. Not really anything. Okay, so here we go. Oh, we got a bunch of stuff coming in here. Unakatsi says, I did not like Korra. Cephalodog says, I'm one of those people that don't like the Korra setting. JP is in the chat. What's up, JP? Says, Zahir is one of the best villains ever. Absolutely. In fact, I think Legend of Korra has some of the best villains of all time. I think Amon is a very interesting and complex villain. I think Zahir is a really interesting and complex villain. And I think Kuvira is a really interesting and complex villain. In fact, I think the most boring villain is, you know, Unalaq, because he's just kind of like, "Rah, I'm the bad big avatar. I want to destroy everything." Rah. Anyways, that being said, Cephalodog loves Korra, just not the setting. And here's the thing. I get it, but I love it for what it is. You know, I love it for what it's doing. And it's this sort of realistic portrayal of what's happening to us. But I do think that Zahir does deserve a special shout out. My favorite thing about Zahir is how Korra has to go back to him in season 4 to like learn from him, to like get in touch. It's so great. Anyway. But yeah, so there's this idea, right? When everyone's special, no one will be, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I get it. And Legend of Korra is definitely a different, you know, feel. The modernization of it. I love Korra, but I'm a sucker for the 20s tech and aesthetic. I love the Streets of New Capenna, talking about Magic the Gathering set, which was set sort of in a Art Deco, you know, 20s. They lost me with the mechs. And it's one of those things that we just sort of strangely take for granted. Like, we're so used to, right? Think about it this way. If you look at the technology, if you go back to Avatar, right? If you go back to Avatar. But see, this is because, okay, Tim, it's because Avatar treats bending in a more, you know, hard magic way, right? And the idea was that, you know, once somebody created the technology to metal bend, Toph Beifong, and once she created her metal bending academy, Toph Beifong's metal bending academy, that she was able to teach it to a bunch of people and they were able to learn from it. It's the same reason that we have 6th graders who are doing algebra today. And algebra used to be like the pinnacle peak of mathematics in our world. And it was like only the highest level, Arabic scholars who were figuring out algebra. And now it's taught at the 6th grade level. Now it's just, you know, part of the course, you know, to middle schoolers. Because what used to be super advanced tech is no longer super advanced tech. The other thing, too, that I think threw people for a loop with Avatar is we're so used to this, you know, look at Tolkien, right? The Third Age lasted like 3,000 years, right? And in the beginning of the Third Age, you know, after Eru Ilúvatar, whatever, you know, sunk Numenor and reshaped the world or whatever, you know, the world was like basically the way it is. And 3,000 years later, the world is basically, you know, the way it is. You know, nothing has changed. They're still running around with horses and swords. Avatar Aang, when he was a young boy, you know, you look at the technology in that game, in that show, right? You know, they have like the Fire Nation has, you know, coal-driven ships. They have very primitive tanks. I'm not saying it's quite like 1920s, but it's very clearly like early steam engine, early locomotives. It's very clearly 1840s technology, 1850s technology, to use our own term. Well, take Aang. He grows up, he dies a little bit early because of his Avatar state thing. You know, so he probably dies in like, you know, 1910 or 1905. Korra is born and she grows up. And by the time she's a teenager and in Republic City, it's the 1920s. And it's like, oh, but that's only like 60, 70 years. Yeah. Look what happened in 60 or 70 years between 1920 and 1990. Look what happened in 60 or 70 years between 1850 and 1920. The world advanced. We're just so not used to seeing that in a fantasy world. And that's because when magic is soft, like it is in Tolkien, you can't productionize it. You can't build a society and a civilization off of it because there's not enough repeatability and dependability and understanding. But when you take magic and you make it hard, I think that innately leads to a society that is more like the world of Legend of Korra or the world of Eberron, right? Where, you know, you're binding elementals to power your airship, where you're using magical spells to establish a courier network, right? And you're basically treating magic like it's a technology. And how do I apply this technology? And a lot of times when it comes to technology in our real world, there's like kind of a 2-step process. Step 1 is creating the technology, right? But step 2 is figuring out how do we apply this technology? And a lot of times, a lot of the advancement comes when we start applying that technology in a more, advanced or more systemized way. And I think that's what sort of creates it to it. So there's this problem where if magic is realistic, it innately becomes not realistic. It becomes not magical. It becomes boring. It becomes rote. It becomes routine. Now, I will say this, having played Dragonlance Saga for many years, okay, and having played recently, been playing Legend, Forbidden Lands. There is a kind of there's a nice part for the game part of a TTRPG that comes when magic just does the thing that you want it to do. And to be able to treat magic as something that is more of a problem-solving tool, right? Because when we think about technology, right? So going back to like the core ethos of D&D, fundamentally D&D was kind of a series of problems to be solved, right? You have to get to the dungeon. You have to explore the dungeon. You have to find the treasure. You have to overcome the traps and the monsters and the obstacles. You need to, deal with all of the getting lost and having light and all the stuff. It's a series of escalating challenges, all sort of initially frameworked around a dungeon. And, sometimes those problems needed to be solved directly, but sometimes they needed to be solved sort of, outside the box and coming up with a different approach. Magic in D&D, with its sort of, this is what this spell does, it does this one thing, and it creates this effect, it processes this effect, is very nice for problem solving. Because when I go to use a tool to solve a problem, I don't want randomness. I don't want unpredictability. I don't want, when I go to use a saw to cut wood, which I do, or at least I did before my garage burned down, I don't want to be like, I don't know if this saw is going to cut this wood this time. Or maybe this saw is going to cut the wood like shit. Or maybe the saw is going to spontaneously explode. These are all very bad things that would not make me very excited or want to use the saw in order to solve problems. And a lot of times when people are playing a game, they expect magic to be about solving problems. And so they don't want magic. What they want is tools. They want a toolbox of reliable tools that they can use in order to solve their problems. When you get into, the situation where you have to kind of, roll randomly, and maybe you turn into a demon, or, roll randomly. Oh, the spell fumbled and everybody dies. Or, you roll and the spell doesn't even happen, or it has some random effect, or you don't really know what the spell is going to do. We kind of have to make it up every time we do it. That can feel very cool thematically. Okay. But from a game perspective, I think it creates, kind of an awkward process. And in particular, I do want to call out games, and the newly to release thing of there's a lot of games that do this, where they try to balance magic by either making it dangerous and deadly, or by making it random. And I think that those things are kind of conceptually flawed as a game. I mean, you might have a group of people who are much more interested in strictly storytelling, in which case I think you can get away with it. But, even when I was giving those examples from Dragonlance, you set the DC, you knew what the DC was, you knew what you had to get with your cards. It used a deck of cards, not dice. And so if you had a good card in your hand, if you had an 8 or a 9, you could be pretty confident that you're like, I'm going to be able to get a 16 or a 17 or an 18 automatically. So when you make your spell and it has a DC or whatever, 16, you go, okay, I know I can cast this spell right now at this moment. If I didn't have this good card in my hand, maybe I'd have to trim down the spell a little bit and it wouldn't be as powerful. I'm not feeling myself as much, right? Dragonlance is an example of input randomness from an RPG, not output randomness. But at the end of the day, you still knew, okay, this is what the spell is going to do, and we'll either pass the check or we won't pass the check. And in many cases, you knew what the DC was before you even attempted it. So you wouldn't really play the card, and you would make it an easier spell. So when you get into this world of like, oh, you cast a spell everybody died, your party died. And it's like, for what reason? Because I chose to use the thing that my class is about. And when like you're the spellcaster and casting spells is problematic, I find that to be very interesting from a novel perspective or from from a story perspective, but I don't think it makes for a great game. So I love soft magic systems, but a lot of the times the way that they've been implemented, I think can potentially be viewed as being kind of problematic. Let's see. We saw a bunch of stuff here. Sorry if I missed a bunch of stuff. But does magic have to be special, or can it just be another integral part of the world? It doesn't. You're absolutely right, Karama. But it's one of those weird things, though, because then you get into this weird zone, right? Where it's like, okay, well, if magic isn't magic, then what is it, right? And that, is kind of starts to blur the line a little bit. And it becomes kind of a weird, I don't know. It leaves the idea of magic in a very weird space. And I don't necessarily know that that's a bad thing, but I think this gets pretty far away from what people think of when they think of magic. It's the same reason why people always go like, I'm one of those people who says like, why isn't every city in a D&D world, lit by continual light spells? Sure. There's not, over the course of thousands of years, I think they would have cast enough continual light spells that these things would have been, created. Yeah, and I agree with you. I think Avatar does treat it as more of a spiritual science. The difference is, though, you can't learn it. You have to be born to be able to bend. Not everybody can become, like, you are born a bender. And when you're born a bender of a certain element, and it seems to be somewhat genetic. So there's definitely a biological component to it, but what's the actual spiritual side? Like, there's no way that you could train really hard and become a bender. It just doesn't work that way. And Omniscitoad, so many times I've heard stories about players who take magic in D&D and attempt to industrialize it. It feels like the natural progression, even when it's a core to the setting. And Omniscitoad, I've seen that the same thing happen again and again and again. Like, in my high-level D&D campaigns over the years, like, my players will start like linking their bases and their airship to each other with, teleportation circles. So they basically have transporters. They'll pimp out their like primary like stronghold meeting room with a bunch of illusion magic, so that it basically creates like a 3D hologram overhead display, so they can war room and create like and they'll oftentimes players will take D&D magic and they will turn it into essentially modern tech. I've seen this happen many times. Cephalodog says, Ars Magica is hitting the right notes for me because it lets you do both. You can create spells that are reliable, the formulaic magic that we were talking about before, and you can also do Mother May I magic, spontaneous, in the same game. And Cephalodog gets to an interesting point, which is another magic system that I think does a good job of feeling realistic is actually Dungeon World, which isn't the most popular RPG of all time. It's not always reviewed that highly, but even though it's considered a pinnacle of it, and the reason for it is because of the way that the ritual playbook ability works on the wizard. And for those of you who aren't aware, in Powered by the Apocalypse, in Dungeon World, wizards have a very, we'll call it, basic list of spells that they can cast. And you can almost think of these as sort of these routine procedural type spells, but they have a separate ability called Ritual, and Ritual can do anything. It's not even like D&D 4th edition rituals or Pathfinder 2nd edition rituals where there's a list of rituals. No. Name an effect. Okay? You could do anything. The GM will tell you 1, 2, 3, or 4 things that you need to do, that have to happen, that you have to align in order for this effect to occur, right? So, it might be like, you need to go receive, you need to go get the orb of infinity and, bring it to the top of, Mount Ordeals at the crest of the next, spring moon. And, once it's there, you must, imbue it with your life's essence. If you do those 4 things, then the magic will occur. And that's obviously a very soft form of magic and is used for the big stuff, right? The epic sort of, because I'll be honest with you, the problem I have with a lot of these soft magic systems is like, it feels like too much work to be like, I just want to like zap him with fire, And so now we're like having to create like a whole new spell just to be able to zap somebody with fire. And it's, from a game perspective, it becomes very, very, rote and boring. But I think the real thing with magic is, and I think Dungeon World, does this the best. But Ars Magica might do it as well, is you basically need to take D&D and you need to take some of your spells and you need to make them kind of essentially, in a weird way, all cantrips or mostly cantrips, maybe like 20%. And then the other 80% need to be removed from the game and just be part of a soft magic ritual system. Because the big problem with D&D comes that, right, me, being like, pew, I'm going to shoot a little ray of fire out of my finger, right, works in the game system the same, and thus in the diegetic world, right? Because, most people try to explain how, they do a really shitty job of it, by the way, of explaining how D&D magic works. But there is this idea, right? There's a spell formula, you're reading it, you're imbuing that energy in your mind, and then, you release it and, if you're playing Forgotten Realms, the energy comes from the weave and it comes from Mistra. And then a little light laser fire shoots out of your finger. The problem is that is the same way that you also teleport across the world, create walls of stone, teleport to other planes of existence, soar into the air, invert mountains, create earthquakes, cast storms of destruction, right? Storms of vengeance. They all operate on the same principle, which is, tick off the spell slot. And that's where, like, when people start trying to apply realism to magic, it falls apart completely, right? And, if we go back to a D&D sense, right, maybe a more minor effect of a wizard might be something more like Gandalf in Moria, right? With his cantrip light spell. Light used to be a much bigger deal when the game was all about dungeon crawling and nobody had dark vision, right? The people who did have infravision. But, you create this light spell and that makes sense. Like, that shouldn't be a big, huge ritual. But what about something that we talked about earlier, like continual light? Well, continual light should never be a spell, in my opinion, right? It should be a ritual. The reason why all the spells aren't, every city isn't lit with, thousands of continual light spells is because in this world, in our proposed world, continual light isn't a spell that they can just cast on demand. It's a ritual and nobody has time for that. Maybe, the high holy temple of whatever is continually lit in the light of the 5 golden, glowing suns that no darkness shall ever penetrate the inner sanctum of this holy place. Right. That's awesome. Cool. Well appropriated. But every random street in the city, no. But when you make continual light, okay, it's a spell slot. It's like a level 2 spell slot. Even a mid-level wizard could just take all their 2nd level, 3rd level, 4th level, 5th level spell slots as continual light. And, for the price of a couple suits of full plate armor, which we always see these huge armies that everyone's wearing full plate, huge things of knights, they got the money. And you're like, I'm going to go cast 50 continual lights today. And I'll cast 50 continual lights tomorrow and yada, yada, yada. And by the end of and you don't even, and these are worlds that have existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So there's absolutely every reason why this should have happened. And it starts to feel weird because it's like, well, is it magical or is it just like a tool and we're just applying it? So, I think that is, that's kind of where I kind of stand on things. I will say that there are games that I think do a really good job of sort of explaining at least how magic is working. One of those being Earthdawn. In some ways, Earthdawn probably takes some, I don't really know what came first, but it might take some inspiration from Wheel of Time. But the idea of Earthdawn is that there is a pattern to everything, right? And it really, in a certain sense, it's like when people can see, when Neo can see the matrix, right? Like the world around you is made of a pattern of various threads all weaved together. And that the reason why there is a tree standing over there is because if you could look into the, behind the scenes of reality, you would see this intricate pattern of magical energy that basically says there's a tree here. All right. Well, what wizards or spellcasters are able to do in Earthdawn is they basically take artificial chunks of the pattern and they shape it and mold it into a form that creates something that may not necessarily exist in the real world. Like, for example, I might create the pattern of a raging ball of fire. And when I weave my magical energy into that pattern, sort of absorbs that energy. And because that pattern says that there should be a ball of fire over there, boom, there's a ball of fire over there. A similar thing, and one of the reasons I love Earthdawn is because I love Earthsea. And Earthsea has a very soft magic system. But basically, the fundamental version of this is magic, like the true forms of magic, are spoken in the old tongue, right? This sort of the language of ancients from the dragons, right? It's this like ancient language from the dawn of creation. And it is impossible to lie in the old tongue, right? You can't lie in the old tongue. So if I say in the old tongue, you're on fire, I can't lie. So that means that reality has to make it true. Now, how does that work? Why does that work? Nobody knows, right? That's why it's soft magic. But there's a certain amount of beauty that comes with the way that soft magic systems are sort of developed. And even in like Earthdawn, this idea that you are, sort of hacking the code, if you will, of reality. Now, Earthdawn, of course, has, the downside that spellcasting can potentially be dangerous, right? Drawing that energy from the astral plane could potentially make you a target for the interdimensional horrors that wait there and to devour your soul and all that other stuff. So this is also a game that basically says, hey, look, if we created a world where people could just, and I'm going to go back to this real quick. Francois says, you were on fire tonight. What about magic and blades in the dark? Great, Francois. We'll talk about that. I'd love to talk about that. Thank you for that. I just want to finish up this thought here, which is that in, well, God knows, because in Earthdawn, we're talking about Earthdawn patterns. Damn it, I got sidetracked. Oh, the idea of like, magic requiring sacrifice. So this is one of the things that keeps magic from, getting out of control and getting out of hand. So, for example, in Earthdawn, yes, I can use magic. Yes, I can warp it and change it. And, and then I can imbue this sort of artificial matrix with energy, right? And Derek says in Earthdawn that there are spell matrices to protect from the horrors, right? But I mean, I think even in the context of the game, Derek, there's this idea that, magic is inherently sort of dangerous, right? We have created these artificial means of sort of trying to hide ourselves, but nothing is ever 100% effective, right? But what I was going to say is contrast this with, again, going back to Wheel of Time. And I apologize if you're not a super Wheel of Time fan, but in the Age of Legend, okay, when there was no Dark One, a certain percentage of people were born with the ability to channel. And the energy of the pattern was infinite, right? The energy of Sadar and Saidin was infinite. Or Sayadar and Saidin. I think that's how you're supposed to pronounce them, but I've always pronounced them Saidar and Saidin. But anyways, but those were infinite, right? And, and even in the books they describe, right? Like that, like it's like a water wheel turning in a river. It will never use up the river, right? It's just taking this energy. So from the one power, it's an infinite source of energy. And in the Age of Legends, even though there was only a few percent of the population who could weave this magic, they created a paradise utopia world with anti-grave technology and everybody. There was no hunger, there was no fear, there was no evil, right? Just having access to magic that was essentially free and full of with no complications, no strings attached, created a paradise world. It created a paradise. It created utopia, like beyond anything that we could even imagine today, right? Like technology so advanced that it almost becomes pastoral, right? You get what I'm saying? Like you don't need everything to look super fancy and high tech because it's so high tech. And so anyways, so that was, the Wheel of Time. That was the this paradise world. And yes, technically one could still over channel if you drew too much of the one power into yourself, the true source into yourself. But by and large, there wasn't really any sort of danger, and it created this paradise world. So what did Robert Jordan do? Well, in order to make the books interesting, he had to create this new world post Age of Legends, right? Where they ripped open the bore and, the taint on Satan caused male channelers to go crazy. And now every time they channel, right, they're acquiring this taint and they're becoming more mad, right? And suddenly we start to get this kind of something you might see in one of these new games where it's like, oh, magic is dangerous. Ah. Okay, but how fun is that? Do you really want to play a character who every time you use your cool abilities, you're like that much closer to dying? Probably not. But if you get rid of that drawback, then you end up with a paradise world. You end up with a paradise world. It's just sort of, so how do you make magic realistic? Well, if you make magic have hard and fast rules and have a low cost or no cost, you end up with utopia. And that is, by the way, most D&D and most Pathfinder 2 worlds. Magic is free, infinite, has no drawback, has no cost, doesn't, even Dark Sun at least, said, oh, you have to draw upon the spiritual energy of the world around you and defile the ground and make it unlivable for whatever. At least there was some sort of cost. Frequently in Dungeons and Dragons of Pathfinder 2nd edition, there is none. So there's no reason why if, over the course of certainly thousands of years, but very much hundreds of years, that they wouldn't have just created a utopia society. And so if you don't, if anything other than that is going to feel almost weird and sort of, disconcordant. Let's see here. Now, Cephalodog says, I do want to play that character. And again, you want to play that character, right, as that specific story arc. What you are interested in is exploring is the process of someone going, drawing deeper and becoming, drawing mad. There are very few people, Cephalodog, who want to sign up to play a character with a ticking clock associated with them. I would play that, but I'm crazy. There are very few people in the wider TTRPG space that want to play a character that basically says, hey, every time you use your character and you do stuff with your character, you are that much closer to basically being removed from the game, right? So we had a question about magic in Blades in the Dark. Well, magic in the Blades in the Dark doesn't really exist. Instead, magic in Blades in the Dark, I really personally like it, and I'll tell you why. I like it because number one, it's obviously very soft. But for those of you who don't know, Blades in the Dark, there is this sort of alternate world, maybe call it the ethereal plane, that is sort of next to reality. And it is called the Ghost Field because, there's kind of this weird like magic steampunk tech with it. And the idea is that like the ghost field, it's something that could be like detected by like, scientific instruments, and they can like affect it with like electroplasm and stuff. But it is definitely like another realm of existence, but it's less magical in my personal belief. And it's more, kind of like an alternate world or a side dimension. And the reason I bring this up is because one of the skills that you have, anybody can have, even if you don't have any ranks in it, is called attune. And the idea is that in this world, everybody can attune to the ghost field to some degree. Now, there are people who are better at it. In fact, people who are really, really good at it are called whispers. But technically, anybody can do anything in Blades in the Dark. So that means that everybody, kind of, sort of, can attune to the ghost field. Certainly any PC, but even a normal person as well. And I like that idea because what that brings up the idea of is that what we perceive of as magic, and again, this is a super soft system because even John Harper is very vague about what the ghost field is and what it could do and what powers you can draw from it. By and large, you are not going to be, casting fireballs in Blades in the Dark, at least not with ghost field attuning. But what attuning to the ghost field is capable of doing is very vague. And in my Blades in the Dark games, I've done a lot of crazy stuff with people attuning to the ghost field. I've had people, sidestep into a different dimension and kind of, infiltrate a house as it looks in this alternate dimension and then get someplace and then shift back to the real world. I've had people travel through time using the ghost field. I've had a lot of, crazy, weird stuff. I've had people kind of gain like spiritual X-ray vision by attuning to the ghost field. But again, it's a super soft magic system. And you might say, and because it's Blades in the Dark, if somebody rolls 1, 2, or 3, and there's a consequence, you could do some nasty stuff. You could have some harm. You could have electroplasmic feedback that like blows up in their face. So it carries that danger risk element to it, which prevents it from just being something that people are going to just spam over and over again and prevents the game from becoming this, magical utopia paradise. So I think that's really interesting. Yeah, Blades in the Dark magic is about as soft as it gets. Yes, I would say that Blades in the Dark is about the softest magic system that you could ever possibly hope to get. But yeah, so I don't think you can make magic realistic because I think if you make magic realistic, it kind of stops being magical. I mean, it might be something else, right? You might call it bending, or you might call it, I don't know, channeling. But in my mind, it is no longer magic. And right, wrong, or indifferent, D&D kind of does magic the worst. But it's great for gameplay because the wizard just gets to do what they want to do, and we don't have to worry about your character's slow descent into madness. You don't have to worry about killing the party members every time you cast a spell, right? You don't have to worry about playing Mother May I with the GM. You know what your spell does. You want it to solve a problem, so you apply it. Now, that being the case, there is obviously very classic instances of, because there's no cost and there's no drawback, that as you get higher level magic in D&D, it can become very abusable because these spell effects are very powerful and they come with almost no drawback. And so for me personally, like if I wanted to like fix D&D, like I said, what I would do is figure out a way to take like about 80% of the spells and somehow create them into some sort of ritual system that is kind of ad hoc and on the fly, and then use spell slots or use whatever to really focus in on those rote, repeatable, safe, kind of processes. Yeah, it's very vague, but I like it, and yeah. And I'll be honest with you, Don Poke. I had my last group of Blades in the Dark players who had played, not super experienced role players in any way. They found the ghost field, they found attuning to be very evocative. They found it to be very creepy. They found it like they themselves, I never really said anything to them, but they themselves feared attuning to the ghost field because it felt like tapping into an energy source that you didn't fully understand and you couldn't fully trust. And so that was like really, really, and I remember, I'm trying to remember what it was, but there was like something that happened when someone rolled badly on an attune check and they like gained this clock, and I didn't tell them what the clock was. I just said that it had like 6 ticks and it was like 1 tick. And every time something would happen, I would just tick it up. And they were like, I'm trying to figure out what's wrong. I know that because I basically described it as like something feels wrong. Something feels off. And they were just like, trying to figure out what there was going on. How to do it. It freaked with them. It messed with their mind. And I thought it was really, really fun. Yeah, exactly. If it doesn't invoke a fantastical feeling, is it still magic? I argue no. I argue no. And I really do challenge you all, I mean, to really think about yourselves. Like, when you're playing Pathfinder or D&D or whatever, does magic really feel magical? You know, when you're playing Final Fantasy or an MMO, does the magic really feel magical? No, it doesn't. It just becomes a process effect, right? And that's great for gameplay. It's great when you're like, oh, here's this problem. I want to use this tool to try to solve that problem. Great, cool. That's a really good game experience. But it is not really magical, you know? And yeah, I agree. Magic can be common so long as there's this realm level magic out there that's either so much bigger than the PC or Lost Time. And you know, that it's funny that you mentioned that, Derek, because we kind of saw that, you know, we kind of saw that in Birthright, right? When we looked at the Birthright campaign setting, obviously it's, you know, in that campaign setting, right? True wizards are like super rare. Like, you have to be like noble blood kings to be wizards, right? There was a second class of mage that really only got like illusion and divination, right? Your kind of typical trickster kind of, you know, wise seer oracle type magic, right? They got very much like, they didn't get your big fancy magical spells. And to do your biggest, most powerful realm magic spells, you literally had to connect the ley lines of energy from across multiple realms. You had to draw in the energy of the mountains and harness it through a series of ley lines, channeling it into your central domain so that you can, you know, cast your powerful spell that will surround your entire kingdom with a magical field, right? Big level stuff. Yeah, Durin, it's a classic example of using this, a quote, right? And any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So understanding ubiquitous magic too, it just becomes a technology. And again, some fantasy authors like Robert Jordan in Wheel of Time have shown this, have demonstrated this. In Blades of the Dark, using a tune to accomplish something a normal skill does make it more difficult, and the PE should reflect that. It depends, Beowulf. I mean, it depends. I mean, if it's a great, you know, if it's a great use of a tuning, why would you make it, you know? Now, a lot of that comes down to be admittedly, Beowulf. I will fully admit, Beowulf, that there are probably very few instances where I would ever allow a controlled roll of a tuning. Just because I'm setting that tone, right? Of, ooh, it's dangerous, it's spooky, it's going to come with consequences. You know, you can't stare into the abyss without it staring back a little bit. But ultimately, there's no reason why. It's up to you to decide how much that costs, right? Yeah, just having that attune sitting on your sheet as a vague but ever-present option. I definitely remember it triggering my just do something instinct. Yeah, so I personally think, let me see if I can find it really quick here. Maybe, do I have that? Do I have that PDF? Let me see here. I thought I did. Oh, yeah, we do. Okay. Let's see if this is right. Moves. Here we go. Okay. I personally think Attune was John Harper taking from the very first Powered by the Apocalypse game, which of course is Apocalypse World. So in and this is Apocalypse World burned over, by the way, but in Apocalypse World, you have 5 stats, right? You have aggro, cool, hard, sharp, and weird. And aggro, cool, hard, and sharp are used for a couple different things, but weird is only used for one basic move, and that is opening your brain. Okay, so when you open your brain to the world's psychic maelstrom, roll plus weird. On any hit, the world's psychic maelstrom fills your perception. Ask the MC, the GM, what you can see and feel, and if the MC has any questions for you, answer them. On a 10 or higher hit, you can try to control it and or interrogate it, But on a 7 to 9, you're just along for the ride. On a miss, be prepared for the worst. So, this is Apocalypse's world version of sort of weird psychic magic. But remember, in Apocalypse world, this is a basic move. Anybody could do this, right? So now, granted, if your weird stat is bad, you might not work out well for you. But by and large, anyone can open their brain to the world's psychic maelstrom. So it's kind of this like generic fallback position of this, crazy fucked over world where it's almost kind of like a Dark Sun feel, right, to it. I'm sure Vincent Baker was inspired by that, right? Because there's this idea in Dark Sun that like everybody has become sort of latently psionic. And I think that's kind of probably similar to this. So Lollipop brings up a good point. I think people were mentioning Fabula Ultima earlier. Fabula Ultima is a great example of, hey, here's the spell. It does this thing. It costs MP and it does this very specific heals, 40 hit points or whatever, up to 3 targets for 10 MP or whatever a piece. Boom, boom, boom. Here's this fire damage spell. It does this fire damage spell, and it's very basic. And you don't have that many. There's, maybe there's only 20 or 30 spells or something in the core book. I could be a little bit off by that, but it's very basic. And then for everything else, you have a series of ritual talents to let you sort of soft magic it up. And huge fan. That's honestly probably my favorite thing about Fabula Ultima. Bar none. Eldritch Blast is the least magical thing I can think of. Right. I mean, that's, but that's also kind of part of the classic trope, right? Which is, like Gandalf is supposed to be this, he's literally a divine spirit sent by the Valar, right? Like, people don't even normally cast magic in this game or in the Lord of the Rings, but what spells does he cast, right? Would Gandalf really be cooler if he was like shooting out lightning bolts every round? Probably not, but it would be probably more fun to play. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is basically what D&D is, right? It's like, now I'll point out something. Also, I'm going to close this window. Even D&D magic had a cost. You just don't see it. And this is another one of those examples. I've said this before. I've said it before. I'll say it again. It's one of those examples of where they took the core idea of D&D, they changed a lot, and they didn't change everything. And some of the stuff that used to be there stayed, and some of the stuff that used to not be there got removed, and they didn't think about the downstream effects of that. You see, D&D wizards from first edition AD&D, they had spells like Fireball, and they had spells like Disintegrate and Finger of Death, and these very powerful spells that are still in the game, Polymorph and Teleport. And they use spell slots. They memorize their spell slots. They cast the spell slot. Okay. So it's the same as today, right? Yes. But wizards had, like, I can't even explain to you how frail they were. They could wear no armor. There was like basically no such thing as dexterity to AC. Imagine being like level 7 and having your AC be 10. They had D4 hit points, and you didn't get Constitution bonus very often. And even if you did, it was like 1 point, maybe. So wizards, and you died at 0. Okay. So, or maybe -10, but there certainly was none of this death save nonsense and all this other stuff. So the price that wizards paid to be able to snap their fingers and, create walls of stone and summon meteors was fucking hard to play a wizard. It was hard to survive long enough to actually get to that, level of proficiency. And so, hey, we got a tip coming in. Thank you, Silver Wolf.
Silver Wolf tipped $5. Hey guys, I can't stay. I just wanted to say I love the AD&D 2nd edition art.
Silver Wolf, if you haven't left yet, can you tell me what product that was from? Do you know what that was the cover art to? Silverwolf, I will, if you're here, I mean, technically Silverwolf could do it, but if anybody can, I'll be very impressed. I mean, we got a bunch of nerds here. I'm sure they know, but thank you, Silverwolf. I'm glad you appreciated it. And so, yeah, GM Scott, the art from the thumbnail. So anyways, so in original D&D, magic was not a given, right? I mean, I think I speak for all of us when I say that was it recycled in the PHB? Maybe. I think I speak for all for everybody when I say that when you first play, through when you play through a D&D campaign or a Pathfinder campaign, right? Like you just expect that you're going to level up. I mean, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of a given. You're like, if I play this game long enough, I will get to level 5. I will get to level 10. I will get to level 15, right? Like I might die, but I could get brought back, or I might whatever, but like it's kind of just an assumption, right? That you're going to make it. And so there's really no downside. And now wizards have D6 hit points and they've got armor and they've got all these defensive abilities. They're not even that weak anymore. So now they've taken the one thing that sort of balanced wizards, which was just how absolutely shit they were. And they got rid of that. But then they didn't tone down the magic or make it cost anything. So what magic used to cost was that being a wizard fucking sucked. That's what it cost. Which is why I will admit this, I don't like some of these OSR games that go, haha, the wizard still has, no armor and they still have low hit points, and they have to roll randomly to cast their spells. And if they fail to cast their spells, the spell could blow up in their face. And, it's like, whoa, what are you doing? Like it's balanced by the fact that the wizard is weak. It's balanced by the fact that the wizard doesn't get to use armor and doesn't get to use, swords and cool weapons and bows. And William, another great example, wizards needed a lot more experience points than the rogue and the thief and the cleric, and even the fighter leveled faster. Boothby.
Boothby tipped $5. Just got out of the gym and am looking forward to the VOD. Have we at all discussed the commoditization of magic and the pros and cons of that?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much been what most of this stream has been about, Boothby. Is like, what do you gain from that? And how does that affect the shape and the world of the game, game world? And how does that affect? Because I think the thing that we have to remember here is there's two things. There's the idea of the fantasy world, and that might be important if you're a novelist. And then there's the idea of the game. And there are definitely people out there who, we talk about GNS theory, and again, I understand. I should come up with my own version of it, but I like using it because my GNS is not the same thing as Ron Edwards' GNS. But there's a lot of games out there that are more interested in creating an interesting simulation of what it would be like to be this wizard. And that might come with a lot of downsides and that might come with a lot of problems, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a great game. And I think D&D, being a TTRPG, has prioritized, the game aspect of it. It's quick, it's simple, it's easy, it's to the point. And it used to be balanced by making it hard to level up. Now it's pretty much a foregone conclusion. Now, they tried this in 4th edition D&D. They made wizards have a limited set of abilities that were more in line with the other, and they kind of reined wizards down a little bit, spellcasters, and they kind of raised everybody else up. And they kind of put everybody on the same power tier, and they said, look, if you're a wizard or a fighter, it's not like you're more likely to survive the campaign as one than the other. You're all going to just level up and get to 10, get to 20, get to 30. And so your powers should be balanced. And people hated it. They absolutely hated it. Wizards, they were like, no, wizards need to be broken and magic should be reshaping the fabric of reality. And so they brought that back in 5th edition. And then people complain because people are like, oh, wizards are so busted. They're so broken. They can just, do anything they want. They can just wave their hands and, defeat entire encounters. And it's like, like Wizards of the Coast is damned if they do, damned if they don't. Unfortunately. So, 4E Druid is the only time I've had fun as a F20 Druid. I don't know that we really had I don't know if we had any real primal characters in our, in any of our 4E campaigns. I don't think we ever had a Druid. Maybe there was one Druid, but I don't think they played often. Duncan, thank you.
Duncan DT tipped $5. Got to go play Microscope for my next Birthright campaign, but I wanted to show my support. Hell
yeah. That is a lot of awesome things to be said at once. A microscope game in order to play Birthright. I love it. What system are you using, Duncan? Are you using AD&D 2nd edition or are you using something else? Sameness of classes was its own thing that manifested through the caster martial divide. I think using the same language, the sameness thing is a little bit overstated. But yes, I think if you want the game to be balanced classes, but I think they always felt different to me. The conditions that certain classes could affect versus other things made the game feel different to me. But that's just me. Warden always seemed really interesting to me. I love their at will. Was it a bonus action or no? Sorry, minor action. I think it was a minor action at will, right? AOE point blank mark. I thought that was so cool. In my mind, they were like the real defender. They were like the most defendery defender, I think. And I think the Warden was pretty sweet. I think that's what it was. Minor action, right? So mark everybody in melee with you. 3.0 Druid was pretty fun once you got Wild Shape. Hours of Wild Shape. And absolutely. So Omnisciatoad, we played a campaign many years ago where we played, I think it's right back here. We played this adventure / mini campaign, right? Red Hand of Doom. And Tim was a Druid. And this was 3rd edition, peak Codzilla. And, Tim wasn't going too ham, but he was going pretty ham. And, he had all the abilities to do all the crazy wild shaping in 3rd edition. And it felt like he would, that scene that every single person who's ever played D&D went and saw D&D Honor Among Thieves. And they saw the scene where the girl from It is running away and she's wild shaping 17 times. And she's diving out of the window as a mouse and then turning into a hawk and then, turning into it's this crazy scene. Right. And everybody who ever saw that in D&D said, that is what I want playing a Druid to feel like. And in D&D, it never will. So, but in 3rd edition, it got close because, wild shape was pretty ubiquitous. And Tim, and it felt awesome, right? Seth, that's right. Seth Howda. Cephalodog. That would take 300 rounds in D&D. Absolutely. Beowulf, could you show us a bit more how magic works in Dungeon World? Sure, Beowulf. KC, I don't love APs, but Red Hand of Doom is great. And KC, I agree with you. I don't like APs either. I don't consider this to be an AP. Let me be very clear about something. Side tangent. I oftentimes will talk about how I don't like adventure paths. That doesn't mean that the adventures that make them up themselves sometimes aren't really good adventures. But I'd also be very clear. I don't have a problem with adventures. In fact, playing modules, running modules is one of my favorite things to do because as a GM, one of the things that I love to do, especially when I'm playing D&D, is when I'm playing Avatar or a Powered by the Apocalypse game or Blaze in the Dark, me, Derek, I want to be involved. I want to be part of the narration. But there are other times where I want to take on a more, I don't want to say adversarial role, but I want to take on a more neutral role. And when that's the case, I love to use pre-published adventures and modules because I love to basically say, look, I don't have any skin in this game, right? I didn't make this challenge to beat you or to be beaten by you. Somebody else wrote it. And now you get to see if you can, you get to throw your medal up against the challenge of this adventure. And if you guys built your characters well and you play well, right? Good players, good PCs, then you'll succeed and it'll be awesome. And as the GM, I get to see it happen. And I'll be very neutral and be more of a referee or a moderator. That's really fun for me. So what I don't like about adventure paths is where they suddenly start going, okay, yeah, exactly. A module should not be conflated with the modern idea of an adventure path, because a module doesn't care what happens or how it happens or why it happens. It's just there, and it's there to be explored. And then once, even a module that's like, oh, there's a town, it's being infested by were-rats, or there's a bunch of murders, and you find out some were-rat, and the party, they have to locate the were-rat lord and kill him. No, they don't. They don't have to. They could maybe strike a deal with him and he leaves town. Maybe they just leave the town and they never come back. All of those things are fine, because there's not another adventure that immediately follows it that says that past adventure had to finish in a certain way so that the rest of the story makes sense. That's what I don't like about adventure paths. It's not that I don't like published adventures. Again, some of my favorite gaming has occurred inside pre-published written adventures. Keep on the Borderlands, Forge of Fury, Heart of Night Fang Spire, Bastion of Broken Souls, Red Hand of Doom, Repanethuk. I mean, the list goes on and on. So, anyways, side tangent. They're also great because you can just drop them into your sandbox, right? They're there to be used by you as a resource. All right, Derek, you gotta listen. You got to respect the skills. I mean, a little bit, right? I mean, the fact that I got that. All right. Nature's Wrath. Once. Okay. I did not get this. Once during each of your turns. So you can only do it once per turn. You can mark each adjacent enemy as a free action. All right. So I wasn't 100% right, but it's even better. It's a free action. Oh, so good. Love it. Let's see. Let me pull up, Dungeon World. This should work. All right. So we'll start here with the wizard. So, here we go. Okay. So this is a wizard. The wizard playbook in Dungeon World. Okay. And you can see that they start with 5 starting moves. All right. So we'll take a look at all of them. All right. First is spellbook. You have mastered several spells and inscribed them in your spellbook. You start out with 3 first level spells as well as all your cantrips. Whenever you gain a level, you can inscribe a new spell of your level or lower. The spellbook is 1 weight. Okay. So we have this idea that spells need to be mastered, and then we can write them into our spell book, and then we can cast them. We start with a couple. So how do we cast a spell? Well, to do this, we do the cast a spell move. When we release a spell you've prepared, remember, technically in Powered by the Apocalypse, I could never cast a spell. Instead, I'm releasing the spell I've prepared. And very much tying into the, BX, D&D, Vancian idea, right? The idea that we've prepared it. It's locked into our brain engrams as a magical sort of fluctuating sine wave of energy. And by speaking the last final tomes, the magical energy dissipates. That's literally what it's supposed to be in D&D, by the way. We make a check. On a 10 or higher, the spell is successfully cast, and we could cast it again later. On a 7 to 9, the spell is cast, but we have to choose one. We draw unwelcome attention or put ourselves in a spot. The GM will tell you how. By the way, almost every player chooses this. The spell disturbs the fabric of reality as it is cast. Take a -1 ongoing to cast a spell until the next time you prepare spells. So basically, you're going to keep stacking -1s to cast spells. And lastly, after it is cast, the spell is forgotten. You cannot cast that spell again until you prepare spells. So fundamentally, this is not that different from casting spells in D&D. All right. The difference being that if you roll a 6 or lower, then the spell doesn't go off. Or I should say the GM makes a move and they decide. All right. So we do have a spell book. So we've got cantrips that look very similar to D&D. We've got, you prepare all your cantrips every time you prepare spells, and they don't have to, cast them. They just happen. Right. So light, cast a spell, unseen servant, prestidigitation. Now note, we start with 3 first level spells and all of our cantrips, but we're still, whenever we're casting a spell. We're still casting cantrips. All right. Anyways, so those are our basic stuff that we can do. And then first level spells, again, very basic. Charm person. The person, not beast, not monster, you touch while casting the spell counts as a friend until they take damage or you prove otherwise. And that's what charm person does. And it has a note that it's ongoing. Contact spirits. Name the spirit you wish to contact or leave it to the GM. You pull that creature through the planes just close enough to speak to you. It is bound to answer any one question you ask to the best of its ability. Or we have plain old boring magic missile. Projectiles of pure force jump out and they deal 2d4 damage. So, these are invisibility, alarm, telepathy. So these are the first level spells. And again, these work kind of rote, right? Not super hard, but magic missile is a pretty hard. That's pretty much describing exactly what it does.
Lollipop Candy tipped $5. Keep making magic. I'll catch the rest on the VOD.
Thank you, Lollipop. Appreciate the tip. And I think we'll be kind of wrapping up here shortly. Magic missile, this is a pretty hard effect. It just does basic boring damage. And quite frankly, this is kind of where you want basic game rule text. We're fighting in a monster. I just want to do damage to it. Everybody else just rolls their damage with their sword. I just want to do damage with my magic missile. Right. And then, we got fireballs and mirror image, a lot of your classic D&D stuff. They put sleep at 3rd level, visions through time. And again, we could potentially cast these once, twice, many times per session, depending on how well we're rolling. If we're rolling really hot, we could cast magic missile over and over and over again. If we roll badly, we could lose the spell. Now, all that's fine. So what about ritual? So one of the other moves that we start with, besides spellbook and cast a spell, is ritual. It says, when you draw on a place of power, so remember, we're talking in the conversation. This move triggers when we draw on a place of power. What does that mean? No idea. No idea what that means, nor does the game tell you. All right? It's up for you and your GM and your world building and all of this stuff to decide, right? Maybe in your world, there are these magical, nexuses of ley lines that lay scattered across the world, and maybe people are always fighting over control of them. And that's what we deem to be a place of power. Or maybe, it has to be the lair of a dragon, or maybe a celestial or a bound demon, right? It's anything, right? So when you draw on a place of power to create a magical effect, tell the GM what you're trying to achieve. Ritual effects are always possible, but the GM will give you 1 to 4 of the following conditions. It's going to take days, weeks, months. That's an option. May not be true. It could happen immediately. The GM is going to give you 1 to 4 of these. First, you must blank. You'll need help from blank. It will require a lot of money. The best you can do is a lesser version, unreliable and limited. You and your allies will risk danger from blank, or you'll have to disenchant blank to do it. So basically, if your player is in a place where in the fiction of your game, they are able to draw upon a place of power to create a magical effect, then they tell you what they want to achieve, and the GM will never tell you no. They will simply tell you what are the conditions that come with that. As a result of this, now, of course, they might say, like, for example, they might say, I want to, destroy the neighboring kingdom of blah, blah, blah. And in the fiction, I might not think that magic's capable of doing that. So I say, okay, well, the best you can do is a lesser version, unreliable and limited, right? The best you could do is bring judgment down to an entire city. Is that cool? And they're like, yeah, that's pretty cool. But first you must blank. And then it's going to take weeks, and you and your allies will risk danger from blank. And this puts the GM on a spot because, they have to sort of be able to make this up. Now, to be fair, this isn't something that, in theory, you should be busting out in the middle of a dungeon. Because you have to draw upon a place of power. So ritual in Dungeon World sort of takes this idea of soft magic, and it gives it a little bit of gatekeeping, right? It says, okay, you could do anything with magic. You could do big, huge magical effects, depending on the fiction of our world and how we've sort of dictated how powerful magic could be. But it has to, you can't just do it while you're walking down the road. It has to be in one of these defined areas of what a place of power is. And what defines a place of power is going to vary from campaign world to campaign world. There is no one right answer. So, and I think it would vary a lot depending on the style and tone of your game. For sure. Like one of the cool things might be like I said, that you might have like some sort of, mana node that is like this, glowing heart of magic. And maybe they're scattered across the world and some of them are hidden and they were lost and people are seeking them because they're these places of power. Right. So, or like I said, or it could be something a little bit more esoteric. Like you might just say generically, you're like, oh, this is a limited place of power. Like you'll only be able to do a minor version here. Right. So, well, Derek, I think the thing here is ideally, right, you want to scale the options to the power and to the fiction of your game. So like if in our world, what you're asking for is going to be a big thing, then I want it to be a big thing. And I want to use 4 options and say, it's going to do this and this and this and this. Right. So I think it makes it so that it's a bigger effect. Yeah, I think that's not a bad idea, Beowulf. A menu like that with soft magic systems, position, effect. Again, if you want to get a little bit more crunchy about it, right? Ritual is designed. Now, to be fair, this ritual system, Derek, is designed to be able to do literally anything. So, maybe like if you like what Beowulf was saying, if you kind of brought in the scope a little bit, what you're describing there, like would make a lot more sense. Combining ritual with the release magic move seems like a solid basis for a magic system. I have found it to work really well. The times that I've played Dungeon World, I have found that, I've been fairly, what's the word I'm looking for? I've been fairly free with what I define as a place of power. Usually when I'm playing Dungeon World, it's usually like in a more limited fashion. But like, for example, if the party is exploring a dungeon and they come across an ancient shrine to a long forgotten goddess of magic, I might say, that counts as a place of power, and obviously it's not maybe a place of power capable of destroying the entire world, but like if the party wanted to do something, they could. And, the reason why I bring this up specifically is like, I remember they started drawing upon this place of power. I don't actually remember what they were trying to do, but I do remember you and your allies will risk danger from, which was basically like that drawing upon the power, sent out this magical signal throughout the dungeon. And basically like everything would start coming in. And I said it was going to take days. I think it was going to take like hours. And so like the group had to like, hold off these waves of these demonic being creatures that like these spectral demonic creatures that were like trying to get to the ritual caster while the ritual was being cast. And, it was like this kind of cool moment. And it felt very magical, right? Like the caster felt like they were drawing upon this powerful ancient magic and doing this really powerful impressive thing. And to be clear, I think the ritual was going to like send out a pulse wave of magic and energy and like kill all these spectral beings in the dungeon. So it was kind of like a, big effect, and it happened. And everyone was like, well, that was pretty sweet. And I think also they had like gotten this like magical staff in the dungeon. And I basically said, you'll have to disenchant it. So like, basically like, they use the staff as like the focal point for the ritual, and they're like supercharging it with the energy from the shrine. And then like the staff, basically explodes into pure energy, ripples out through the dungeon like a ethereal shockwave, and sort of rid it of all these spectral demonic presences. But it was really cool to get there. And everyone was like, that wasn't a spell. That felt very magical because we weren't really sure what was going to happen, and we didn't quite fully understand it or control it. And that meant it was soft magic, and that's why it felt magical. Again, Dungeon World's cool and all, but I'm telling you, okay, having played it a lot, Magic Missile, in any game that you play Magic Missile in, when Magic Missile reads like this, is never going to feel magical. It'll feel like a missile, but it won't feel magical. It just won't. So yeah, I think to answer the question, can you make magic realistic? Yeah, but then it's not magic, and it becomes more of a technology. It becomes more of a tool. And again, there are games that do this, pretty well, and make it part of, into into the diegetic lore of their world. Earthdawn, again, does this awesomely. And I'm a big fan of it. But I do worry sometimes with some of these soft magic systems because I have played them. I've played lots of Dragonlance. Lots of Dragonlance back in the day, right? Oh, look at that hand. That's way too many cards. And it was a lot of fun and it felt very magical, but it was always, sometimes a little vague. It was a little, wonky. And I will say that there is a certain satisfaction that occurs when the players use a magical spell and its effect is pre-described and they use it to solve a problem, and it doesn't really involve the GM having to make a mother may I decision. And the reason why, and again, this has just been my experience. It may not be the same for you. Let me give you an example. If we were doing a dungeon crawl and we're playing something maybe a little bit more old school and you guys really just care about treasure and experience, and there's supposedly a very powerful magical sword on this level of the dungeon. And it's a flame tongue. The fighter really wants it. And you finally find this, chamber of the dungeon, and there's like, a fire-breathing Hydra or red dragon or something, really tough monster. And you kind of basically get a sense for like, you're drawing in your map, you're filling in you're drawing in your dungeon map, you're drawing in your 10-foot squares, and you see this corridor and you go, hey, I think that corridor comes right around the back of the dragon's horde. And they're like, yeah. I'm like, okay, what if we cast a pass wall spell and then we cast invisibility and silence on the rogue, and the rogue sneaks in and grabs the sword and we don't ever fight the dragon? And everybody goes, yeah. And we know that these spells are going to do these things and we're going to use them to do this kind of heist, this kind of clever solving. And the party goes and does that. And then it happens and works. And everyone goes, wow, that was fucking sweet. That can feel really good. Now I get it. Some GMs get really frustrated because they're like, oh, my players cheated. They use their abilities and spells and they didn't even have to fight the dragon that I wanted them to fight. Yeah. Go kill yourself. It's stupid. But I do think that is very satisfying. Whereas when the player kind of has to, because in a sense, the player's like, I'm casting this spell. You, the GM, are going to tell me what happens, but I'm going to cast the spell. And the spell is going to do this thing that I did it for, But when you have to like go through this, like, but first I have to get the GM's permission, and first we have to create the spell, and he's going to be like, well, in this case, in this situation, I personally feel like it takes a little bit away. It takes a little bit away from the victory. And maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just my play group. But I find that sometimes part of the fun of playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, now don't get me wrong, different games are for different experiences. But when you're playing like a traditional fantasy game, part of the fun comes from the feeling that you beat the dungeon, right? And you kind of, in a way, beat the dungeon master because it was their dungeon, And I like that. I like that as a dungeon master. I like that as a player. I really like that as a dungeon master. And I think that having these magical effects that aren't soft enables that kind of, thing. And someone mentioned magical items as well. Magical items are another example of hard magic, right? This magical item does this thing. And, I can't even tell you how many crazy, clever, silly, stupid things my players have come up with over the years with, ropes of climbing and Qual's feather token trees and Qual's feather token anchors and, portable holes and, all sorts of crazy nonsense. I remember Smith in our Dragon's Delve campaign early in the campaign got like a box of Nolzur's Marvelous Pigments. And if you don't know what Nolzur's Marvelous Pigments are, look them up. But basically, you can paint stuff and it becomes real, like a realistic illusion. Anyways, real, I guess. Anyways, point is, it was like a creative person's, wet dream, and it just did what it said on the tin, And so when something does what it says on the tin, right, it doesn't have the chance of misfiring, and it doesn't have the chance of becoming a demon, and it doesn't have the chance of, whatever. When something just works and does what it says on the tin, it isn't very magical. I'll be the first to admit it. But it can be a lot of fun. And it can be a lot of laughs, because you get to and it can be very satisfying, I should say, not just fun but satisfying, because it feels like you're reaching into your toolbox and you're pulling out these cool tools. Now, I could get into a whole separate conversation about that's kind of part of the problem. My issue with the martial caster divide isn't that the casters aren't powerful. It's just that the martials don't have as much fun stuff to pull out of their bag of tricks. But I also counter that that's where like magical items used to be a bigger deal, and the weakness of the casters kind of necessitated the physical abilities of the fighters. And one of the beautiful things about D&D has always been the idea that that's your character, but just because my player, just because my player character is the fighter doesn't mean that I, Derek, can't be like, hey, would this be a good place to use pass wall? And the wizard goes, yeah, that's a great idea. Obviously, in the context of the fiction of our world, the fighter probably would not have been the one to remind the wizard to cast pass wall. Whatever, I don't care about that, right? My wizard and my fighter aren't playing the game. I'm playing the game with my fellow players. So I'm going to speak up and say, like, basically, like, I want to avail myself of every resource in the party. I don't want to be, I don't want to Monday morning quarterback anybody, but, I think that's, fine. But that being said, that style of play maybe not as good for the sort of dramatic character arc telling stories that, that are very popular, that I like as well. Let me be very clear about that I like those type of games too. But you have to know which one you're trying to go for. And so this idea that the D&D system, can work for everything, I think is a flaw. I personally think that the D&D system, the sort of fire and forget, Vancian, highly defined mechanical spell effect, it processes, it does this thing, minimal cost, I think it's very, very good, specifically for fantasy, heroic, adventure, dungeon crawl. Full stop. Anything other than that, I think it falls apart. It just does. And I think if you want a system that has more nuance and more elements of simulation or narrativism, you're going to want something a bit more soft. And I think that leads to magic feeling more magical. So it feels real in the sense that it feels not real, feels magical. But if you make magic real, then it feels more just like, a magic spell feels the same as a fighter pulling out their pole arm or, reaching in and getting a piece of equipment out of your backpack. CD8 demand. I don't know how to say that. Demand says, I guess I always consider myself on the side of players, not the monsters. When they come up with a good idea, I'm like, hell yeah, let's see what happens. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the principles of Dungeon World that I pretty much think everybody should espouse at all times is be a fan of the players. I think we're here for that. That being said, I think it depends on the scale. If I'm trying to be very neutral, and I'm trying to basically not give them a free lunch, then, I need to be fair, and I need to also say what honesty demands. That's another principle of Dungeon World that we need to remember. So while I am a fan of the players, I also want to make sure I'm not giving them a victory. They're earning it. And so I'll say what honesty demands. If they come up with a terrible idea, then so be it. I remember there was some chamber. The players were supposed to like figure out some puzzle or something. And there was these symbols on the wall, on the floor that would tell them which chain handles to pull down. And there was like 5 or 6 chain handles, or maybe 7. I don't remember how many there were. There were a lot, but they like didn't even really try. They were kind of, everybody was laughing and kind of, being jerks, not like being jerks, but you know what I mean? They were being typical asshole players and, And so like, they thought it would just be funny. Like, yeah, we don't care about Derek's puzzle. We'll just pull all 7 levers at once or whatever like that. Or 7 chains at once. And I was like, okay, well, that's not right. And then each chain releases this really tough fight. And all 6 of them get released because you pulled 6 wrong ones, or you put them in the wrong order. And I just, I wiped the party. I TPK'd them. And, nobody was bitching, because that's the beautiful thing about my player. My players will fuck around and find out, but then they're like, yeah, I had that coming. And I've said that before too. That's happened to me. I remember one time I was player. Smith was the GM. So I'm playing. It's me. It's Tim Carpenter from the channel, our buddy Rich. And we're playing, and I'm a wizard, and we're traveling north to, like, I don't remember if we were going to some fortress or some ruined giant fortress or something. And Smith is giving us this, like, flavor description of, like, the travel, he's, like, talking about, the trees and the flocks of nearby birds and chickens. And I'm like, we don't care about that. I even, like, was kind of being an asshole about that. I was like, we don't even care about that. And he's like, okay, well, then I'm not going to even bother to make a check to see if the cockatrices surprise you. And they do. And then we all got turned to stone. And, we were all like, shit, we did, that's on us. That's our fault. We were being assholes and ignoring the description. And we're just like, it's flavor text, skip it. And it's like, okay, I'll give you exactly, Tim. Yeah. Tim was there for that. So, anyways, true story of that one is that, Smith was basically like, sedated, man. All right. Thank you. Good stuff. Good to know for next time. The funny thing about this was like back like in this era of West Marches. And so the rest of the party wasn't even with us this day. It was just me, Tim, and our buddy Rich playing. And we went out on a separate adventure without the rest of the party, because we had like 7 people in that party, I think, total. So it was just me, Tim, and Rich, my buddy Rich. And we went on this adventure midweek or something, like off of the normal thing. And we went over to like Smith's apartment, and we're playing on like a Wednesday night or something like that. And this happens pretty early on in the night. And Smith basically swears us to secrecy. He says, you can't tell the other party members, what happened. Because you didn't tell them because you didn't want them to know. So as far as they're concerned, you left town and never came back. And, this is like that kind of like, we're playing D&D a lot. Like, I would never do this today. Let me be clear, because we're lucky if we play once a month. But back when we used to play like 2 or 3 times a week, like if somebody was like, well, you don't get to play in the next session because, you're turned to stone, that's fine. So we all worked at the same place, and, we were sitting there trying to figure stuff out. And then suddenly Tim and Rich bust into Smith's office, and they say, Derek's familiar didn't make a save, so he might not be turned to stone. And, Smith is like, yeah, but Derek's familiar hates Derek. Like, I didn't even give my familiar a name. My familiar's name was just Raven, because I was just like, you are just a tool to me. I have no personal attention to you whatsoever. Like, I'm like the complete opposite of like the modern TTRPG player where it's like, oh, this is my little furry buddy. I was like, no, you are just an object for me to give me awareness feat. And he's like, Smith's like, yeah, okay, fine. Derek's turned to stone. You're all turned to stone. The Raven will finally be like, freedom, and then flee away. And they're like, yeah, he hates Derek, but he loves Rich's character. And Smith's like, God damn it, you're right. He does love Rich's character. So my familiar loved the Rich's character. And so the familiar flew back to town, and being a Raven could speak in common, and told the party members what had happened, and they came and saved us. Anyways, we'll end with that. We'll end with a little bit of a story time of how the Raven saved the party. This is the same Raven, by the way, that also died when the Banshee screamed, and it dying made me lose experience points, which dropped me a level. And then the next round I died from the Banshee, which dropped me another level. And so in the course of, 2 rounds, I lost 2 levels of experience. Same wizard, same campaign, same Raven. So yeah, that is going to do it for tonight. Kind of a more of a esoteric discussion. Harsh, but probably fair. I would just say it comes down, for me personally, I love soft magic, and those are my favorite books. And maybe part of the reason I have bounced off of like the Sanderson novels, Sanderson is quote unquote known for his magic systems, which is great. I just don't like them. I just don't like hard magic. Hard magic to me is not something that to me is fantastical. It doesn't feel magical to me. And Wheel of Time is about as hard of magic as I want to get. And even then, like I said, Wheel of Time has a lot of elements to it that aren't fully understand. The true source and the true power are kind of like what's going on, and all the stuff in Tel'aran'rhiod, and the what's that other realm? The realm of the Elfim and the Eilfim. So it's like there's a lot of weird shit that they don't understand, and they can't explain it. And no one's really quite sure where this power source comes from. It's certainly not, a fully understood system. And so I appreciate it and I enjoy it, even if there is a way of a sort of a formalized doctrine of talking about it. So does that mean I hate Vancian casting? No, because I think it makes for great Dungeons and Dragons. But outside of that, I don't think it's great. And I think that if you take the D&D system and you try to make sense of it and make it diegetic, it blows up because it doesn't make any sense, you know? And that's exactly right, Derek. Something I do appreciate about hard magic systems is that they give you the rules, which lets characters be very clever using inside the box stuff in unique ways. And that's exactly what I was talking about, Derek, with like using the pass wall and, you know, setting up some sort of weird system, or, you know, just using a bunch of spells in a very interesting and creative way. Like I'm trying to think of another example of this. You know, like creating an illusion, right? Using like move earth to dig a pit and then using an illusion spell to make the corridor look normal. And then as a bunch of enemies come in, the wizard at the other side casts gust of wind and pushes them all down and they fall into the pit, right? Like you're using the spells. They're doing what they're supposed to do. Because let me be very clear about one thing. I like D&D magic spells. What I don't like is like I don't like when they get too Pathfinder. I don't like when they get too Pathfinder-ified. Okay. Pathfinder 2-ified. Okay. Grease is the best example of this I could think of. See, I like the grease spell to be this. I am magically creating a layer of grease. And I could use that for any of the things that one might use for grease, including lighting it on fire, which was always a classic go-to staple in our arsenal. When you over-mechanize the magical effects and they just become like, this spell can only do this exact one thing in the game mechanics, that's when I think it's gone too far. And I think that's when it becomes, not only is it not magical, now it's not fun. And it's lost everything that would make it even remotely interesting to me. Do you think there is a happy medium between hard and soft magic? Is there a system that you think is a good example of that? Firm magic. I think Fabula Ultima does a really good job. I mean, the rote spells are very hard and they're very basic and there's not that many of them. And they basically do the sort of basic magic type things that you would want to do. Fire damage, heal, you know, that very basic type stuff. And then for anything else, you have a ritual system, which still uses the same system of MP, which is one of the reasons I love it, is because it's not drawing from two completely different systems. They both draw from your MP. It's just a question of time, effort. Rituals are a little bit more, scalable. And the talents that power rituals are much more broad. They're much more like those schools that we saw from Dragonlance. So I think Fabula Ultima, I really like the system there, for sure. Back to Mage the Ascension. I love correspondence plus matter. Teleport your knife into people while pretending to throw it. Sounds pretty cool. So I do think Fabula Ultima, one of the reasons I love it is because of the magic and the rituals. And I just like that. It solves all these issues of not needing hundreds of super specific spells that just, quite frankly, we just don't need, and instead creating a cool system based around, cool ideas and really out of the box pop problem solving, which I think is really interesting. I mean, that's a personal choice, Beowulf. I mean, I don't hate it. Anon says, not specifically realistic, but all the spells in my Heartbreaker have both intended and unintended side effects, like drugs. And like drugs, they can be applied off-label. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm sure you're creating a system that to your specifications and standards. I guess I have gotten mixed mileage. I've gotten mixed mileage out of Magic having all these drawbacks. Now you say unintended consequences, so that might mean something different. But I do think you need to be careful with that. Magic can be dangerous, but if it feels too, like if it's going to be completely, because here's the problem. Like Magic in Forbidden Lands is really powerful. It always works. There's hardly any way to resist it. And you can pretty much just instant kill anything. The danger is that you turn into a demon, or your body, all the bones in your body break when you cast a spell. Or somebody sees you cast magic and your reputation increases. I don't know how that's a bad thing, but it's come up a lot in our Forbidden Lands campaign. Now, this doesn't happen every time you cast a spell. So what does this mean? Well, it means that either magic is really powerful and kind of game breaking to the point where it may not even be that interesting or fun, or it's debilitating, like crazily debilitating. So for your character. And you might say, look, really powerful, right? 10 out of 10, really shitty, 1 out of 10, perfectly balanced. But remember, perfectly balanced, you'll never actually get a 5 out of 10, right? You're either going to have it be like super broken and like there's no consequence and it happens again and again and again. And you're like, well, this is ridiculous. They are just killing everything. And it's not even fun. It's not even a challenge. Or it's, you blow up and everybody, you turn into a demon or you blow up, and sure, that's balanced, but is it fun? I don't know. Take care, Chris. Thanks again for the support. I like, what? I will say this. I do like push your luck mechanics with spellcasting. Yes, that I'm okay with, that I'm okay with. We talked a little bit about Broken Empires, Dan, because we talked about Ars Magica and we talked about how, Trevor is basically taking his favorite elements from that. I mean, actually, he said it, so I respect the hell out of the guy, but as he's talking about games, I'm like he's even using like the terms, like he's calling his one set of skills wises, which is exactly from Burning Wheel. And they basically kind of do the same thing. And I mean, he really has said, these are the games I've played for the last 30 years that I really want to make. And he said that one of his primary inspirations for his magic system was Ars Magica with the verb-noun system and some of that kind of free-formness. So I think it's cool. I think it's very interesting. It remains to be seen. What I am concerned about is how risky it is. Like, is it going to be fun? Are you going to feel like a wizard? How much does the whole pattern, I can't remember what he called it, warping, I think he called it, or wefting or something, where if you, mess up too many spells, your character is just like deleted from existence. Like mechanics like that sound fine on paper, but I don't know how well they always play out with the majority of gamers. They might work for you and your specific table. And I appreciate the hell out of the fact that Trevor he's like, I'm building this game, for me, essentially. And if you want to play it, great. So I really do appreciate his honesty. And he seems like a very forthright guy. I got a chance to meet him at Gen Con and get dinner with him. And we didn't really talk too much, but pretty sure I'm going to be supporting his Kickstarter just because I think it sounds like he's really doing a lot of stuff with some of the games that I've really come to appreciate over the last couple of, years that I otherwise would normally have not really have taken a look at. Like even his whole thing with success levels coming from Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I'm like, oh, cool. Like we just reviewed that 4th edition. So pretty cool. I like in the Magician series, if you overcast, you become a being of pure magic and go crazy evil. It's like, I know that's cool from like a narrative perspective, but like it gets old really quick at the game table. That's all I'm saying. Absolutely. I mean, that's a good reason to back anything, is just, because if somebody says, this is what I want my game to be, and I'm not willing, I'm committed to that vision and I'm going to make that reality. And I'm not going to cut corners just to increase market appeal. So, I mean, I imagine he's got to be doing pretty okay. He's got to be at least at 100K, huh? I think it just started today, right? Where are we at? He is at, 200K. Wow. Great. That's great. That's fantastic. I mean, I don't think it'll get to $1 million, but maybe, I think, maybe 500,000, $500,000. That'd be great. I'm shocked. I'm shocked that not like it's bad or anything like that. I'm just shocked that it's doing that well. Yeah. Not too shabby indeed. Yeah. No one wants to hand over their character sheet because too much magic at the end of the day. I agree. Yes, Beowulf. I actually completely agree with that. The trick to magic overcasting, similar to choosing the sacrifice option at FU. When you make it a player choice, that's huge. Again, the main thing with everything I've been talking about tonight comes down to player agency. And I get that, like, a lot of player agency is control, and control can make things not feel magical, because if it's in control, that means it's more like a tool. And I get it. So there's a temptation to remove control in order to make the magic feel more magical. I get it. It's totally natural. What I'm saying is, when you remove control, you're removing agency. When you remove player agency, you're removing the reason that we're playing the game. So to a certain extent, So that's what you have to be careful about, you know? Alrighty, folks. Well, we're going to wrap it up there. We had a nice little stream. I didn't even think we were going to go 2 hours, and we went the full 2. So hot damn. Shout out to London, Unikatsi, Francois, Silverwolf, Boothby, Duncan, and Lollipop for your tips and super chats. Appreciate everybody coming out. Cheers to you there as well, Phil. Appreciate you stopping by. Glad you enjoyed the stream. I agree that Blades in the Dark would do that really well. You build up to the harm, and then you take the traumas, and then eventually your character is just like, I'm out. But again, that I will say, Derek, that, you know, there's a lot of people I've played with Blades that would say, like, I don't want to play this game long term because the idea is that my character is pretty much on a timeline, right? They are going to eventually trauma out. So yeah, you can catch shout out to the Ars Magica stream. Yeah, I recommend. We do have an Ars Magica 5th edition stream. I was pleasantly surprised with the game, and I thought it was really cool. Definitely something that I'd like to go back to. I don't think I own the hardcover, but I think I might pick up the hardcover. It's actually a cool book. It's something that I want to take a look more. Although I think there's a 6th edition coming out. Someone said that. Or maybe a Kickstarter. Catching up with the L5R stream. There's so many. Yes, it's a good stream, Anon. We tried to be short and to the point, and it's debatable if we achieve that. So thanks you, everybody. We'll be back later this week. And until next time, I hope everybody does really well. I'm going to keep focusing on my health and doctor's appointments, and trying to get caught up in my life. And shout out to my awesome and amazing bosses for giving me a little bit of time off to sort of deal with all these doctor's appointments and just kind of being pretty messed up. So thank you to Kaz and Smith and Tolsman and anybody else, Jackie. So anyways, take care, and we'll see you next time on Knights of Last Call. Peace.